All right, guys, so this is interesting. We have David Pakman and Michael Knowles went at it. They went at it, and they talked about Roe v. Wade and things surrounding that. Let's listen.
I want to make sure that we're not just in an echo chamber here. We're not just talking to ourselves. So I'm bringing on someone who I suspect is more reasonable than Joe Biden. I hope he's more reasonable than Joe Biden. This would be David Pakman. David coming back to the show, nationally syndicated progressive talk show host on TV and radio. David, thank you for coming back to the show.
The first time went so well, I had to come back for seconds.
I knew it. That's why we.
He's joking about that. They had an exchange that was a bit of a disaster, where they talked about the definition of a woman and the question that was asked to the new Supreme Court justice. Why am I blanking on her name? Ketanji Brown Jackson. Yeah. So they went back and forth on that, and it was sort of a mess. And so that was a little joke there.
Invited you back. And listen, I was disheartened to see that Joe Biden and Jen Psaki would not condemn the protests at all hours outside of the justices' homes and residential.
Now, by the way, they went on to do that. They didn't the first day, and I thought that was based. Then the second day, they came out and sort of backed off of that. It's a shame, because we'll get into this in a little bit. But yeah, the right always cloaks themselves as the First Amendment believers, the Constitution believers. We love free speech. We love free expression. And then the second that we have an instance where it doesn't fit into their personal politics, all of a sudden they flip on that principle.
Neighborhoods before their families. I suspect, I mean this sincerely, I'm not being facetious at all. I suspect you are more reasonable than the staffers at the White House now.
I hate how he's loading that. Well, obviously you agree with me because you're reasonable, right?
We at least agree this is bad. It is bad to protest outside of Supreme Court justices' homes.
No, we cannot.
Well, so I suspect you want to have a good faith conversation about this. Is that a fair assessment? So we can speak freely here. You're not just looking to play gotcha here.
I'm not. No, I really
okay,
not.
All right,
That's not what we do on the show.
So let's see. This is not a protest technique I would employ, right? But
it's one that I would employ.
Have a large platform online where I'm going to reach way more people than going to anybody's house. So like my personal thing is this is not a protest technique I would employ. Let's go.
He's saying he wouldn't personally show up to it. Okay, that's a different conversation. But in terms of supporting it and saying, hey, this is a way to get your voice heard. This is a way where you have a right to state your position and peacefully have your voice heard.
Through like legality, morality, ethics, etc.
Yep.
Anything that is a criminal act like a Molotov cocktail, destruction of property, whatever, it should be reported. If there's a crime, people should be charged. If you can get a guilty verdict, they should be sentenced. Fine. Very, very good.
Yep.
Totally agree. That's obvious. If you're actually breaking the law, doing things that are immoral, unethical, illegal, yeah, of course. They should get arrested and they should be charged. Duh.
In terms of the speech aspect of this, there's this case from the 90s, Madsen v. Women's Health Center, which found that it's okay for anti-choice protesters to go and protest outside the homes of just random workers at abortion clinics. Okay, now that's not my opinion.
Look at Michael Knowles' face. Look at his face. Oh, damn it. That's a really good point. That is a wonderful argument. So you'll see what he's going to do, but he's going to let me invoke federal law and a statute that says you can't actually do this. Now understand something. What supersedes? Is it federal law, or is it the Supreme Court saying here's the interpretation of the Constitution? The Constitution is the supreme law of the land, so that would override any federal law. You could test the legality of the law at the Supreme Court, and if they say this law is unconstitutional, well then guess what? That law's got to go ski. So what he invokes, and it's a moot point. It's null and void, because if that law were to be tried and it were to get all the way to the Supreme Court, guess what's happening to that law?
That's a decision that exists.
Yep.
Those are quite literally private citizens. They're just like medical workers, right? So if that's okay and we have a First Amendment, certainly showing up and protesting isn't against the law. Are you and I on the same page about that piece?
No, because in the U.S. Code...
I'm pro-free speech, I'm pro-First Amendment, I'm anti-cancel culture, and now I'm going to flip on all of those things.
18 U.S. Code, Section 1507. The law.
I love how he cites the numbers. They think that that's like something that's going to make everybody, ooh, he said numbers about the law, so he must be right in his interpretation of it.
The federal law explicitly prohibits protesting outside of the homes of judges with the intention of influencing their decisions.
And that's unconstitutional. If that were to go to the court, go all the way up to the Supreme Court, they would throw that out. They would throw it out. Well, actually, maybe they wouldn't because this implicates them. But if they are being objective in their ruling, they would say this law is unconstitutional. Because if you are allowed to protest outside of not just abortion clinics, but also the homes of the employees of the abortion clinics, well, if you're being consistent, you would say, well, of course you could protest outside of a politician's house. Of course you could protest outside of a judge's house or a justice's house. So it's like he cites this thing which should be overturned today. And if we viewed the situation objectively, it would be.
So if
the
they were,
decision has been done, though.
No, it hasn't. The decision hasn't come out. There was a leaked draft of the opinion. So I would agree with you. It's not clear that they were in violation of the law if the decision had already come out and they were just expressing their anger. But because the decision has not come out, because it seems clear to me that the protesters are trying to change the course of how this decision is going to come and try to bring political pressure, to me it seems quite clear this is a violation of federal law.
No lawyer I've spoken to says that this is against any law unless some specific, if there even something as relatively benign as a noise ordinance, let's say there's a...
This is exactly what Madsen versus Planned Parenthood says. Pakman's 100% correct. In Madsen versus Planned Parenthood, they said, look, you're allowed to protest outside of the abortion clinic. You're allowed to protest outside of the homes of the employees, but you can't break any of the other rules and regulations around that. So if there's a noise ordinance, like he says, where after a certain time you're too loud and the cops get called on you, well, then guess what? You're breaking the law and action can be taken. You can be arrested or fined or whatever. There's even rules in terms of how far away you have to be. At one time, an ordinance said you have to be 300 feet away, but the court looked at that and said that is too repressive. That actually is functionally taking away their free speech. So then I think they changed it to 36 feet, and 36 feet was okay. So yeah, if you want to say you can't be physically on the property of the Supreme Court justices because you're trespassing, so you're breaking the law, fair enough. But if they're on the public road right next to it, which they were, then that's allowed. That's allowed.
Noise ordinance that starts at 10 p.m.
Yep.
If it's 11 and you're being loud, okay,
but
now we have something to talk about. But that's
not the law
that who says there's any law being broken here.
That is the law. I mean, the viewers are free to go check it out. But that is a very specific law. There's actually a Virginia statute too. But I'm just talking about the federal law, 18 U.S.C. 1507. You can look it up. Now you might say, well, I don't like that law. I don't think it's just.
I just don't think
it's
it's applicable here. I just don't think it's applicable at the homes of these individuals in Virginia, based on lawyers I've spoken to. Neither you or I are lawyers, so we may just be.
But I can read the law. I mean,
further.
The statute is plain. Are you saying that you don't think that the protesters are seeking to influence the decision?
They definitely are seeking to influence the decision, but that's okay. That's free speech. And I'm totally fine with that. I'm totally fine. In fact, that's a peaceful way to try to redress your grievances and petition your government. That makes sense. I mean, how could you be against that? Here's how you know Michael Knowles is full of it. If you just flip the facts of the case, he would flip his opinion. So, in other words, let's say the Supreme Court ruled to uphold every aspect of Roe versus Wade, and that's the decision that leaked. And then you have conservative protesters show up at the homes of the liberal justices. And they do the exact same thing that happened in this instance. They're on the public street. They're not on the property. They're peacefully protesting. They have up signs that say abortion is murder, a fetus is human life, or whatever, right? Is there any chance Michael Knowles would be outraged by that? And he'd be out there like, look, they're breaking the federal statute number 1784, fuck your mother. No, he wouldn't do that. He would support the protesters because they agree with his ideology. And that's how you know he's not thinking about this stuff objectively. He's not thinking about it in terms of principles or ethics or morality or the law. He's selective in how he applies it. We all know that that's the case. We all know if they upheld every aspect of Roe versus Wade and right-wing protesters, pro-life protesters were on the public street outside of the house of the liberal justices, he would have no problem with that at all. He'd be totally fine with it. The difference is, again, I'm consistent. And Pakman's consistent on this. If that was happening, I would say they have a right to protest. I might not agree with them on the things they're saying in their arguments and their political position, but they have a right to be out there. This is why I find it's such partisan hackery, because all the time, nonstop, the right-wingers cloak themselves. I believe in free speech. I believe in the First Amendment. I believe in free expression and right to protest. Like, these are, this is core to Western civilization. And then the second they disagree on the politics of it, all of a sudden it's like, actually, no, technically this federal statute, which is unconstitutional, but this federal statute says that you can't do the thing that you're doing.
I haven't spoken to them, so I really can't say. But
you can hear what they're saying, right?
What's that?
You can hear the sort of things that they're chanting. They're not saying.
I actually have not heard what they're chanting. I don't know what are they chanting? You tell me.
They're chanting my body.
Pakman shouldn't be evasive on this point because, yeah, they're trying to change the decision. But that's okay. That's good. That's based. I like that. They should do that. That's fine. So for him to say, I don't know if they're trying to change the decision, I don't think this is the right response from him.
My choice. They're chanting,
My body, my choice isn't change the decision.
Of course it is.
That's just their opinion, right? My body, my choice.
They're chanting in support of the ruling that will be overruled by the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization case.
Listen, I think that if we want to get into the minutia of this at the legal level, I think you would have a hard time arguing that legally saying my body, my choice is equivalent to saying change your decision. So I don't know.
David,
that this is the best path for us.
what would they be doing outside of the justices' homes before a decision comes out, after a leaked opinion?
Expressing their opinion. I mean, listen, legally, I don't think you're going to win on that. I don't think you're going to win on legally they were breaking the law because they said my body, my choice. It seems very weak.
No, David, they're not merely saying my body, my choice, and they're not merely posting some opinion online. They're going to the homes of these people. Actually, the group that sent them is called Ruth Sent Us. They said that this is an unacceptable attack on women and LGBT, and we need to force them, right? That was the key word. We need to force them to change their views using a diversity of tactics. And we would acknowledge that peaceful protesting is just one tactic, so it seems like they're calling for other things. But even that word...
Is he implying that they're also for violence? Because they're very clearly not for violence, and that is incredibly disingenuous. And the fact that it's peaceful is what makes it based, is what makes it good, is what makes it something that everybody should support, even if you don't agree with them on the politics of it. So he's saying you shouldn't even be allowed to try to change the decision through these means. Why? If it worked the other way, and let's say, hypothetically, the Supreme Court flipped their decision from a liberal decision to a conservative decision because of conservative protesters, he'd be like, that's awesome, these people are heroes. I support what they did in principle and in reality. But he can't do it and won't say it now because, again, it's protesters he disagrees with.
Force. What is that word,
Michael? Now you're blending. Now you're saying, well, they've used peaceful protesting, but they're calling for other things. So they've broken.
That isn't my problem. No. I mean, I think that is a separate issue. But the very fact that the organization that sent, I'm sorry.
But you introduced it in this conversation.
That's a problem as well, that they're calling for a diversity of tactics. But the chief problem that we're discussing here is that the organization that is taking responsibility for sending the mobs to the justices' homes says we need to force them to change their minds. We need to force them to not attack women and LGBT.
Yeah, but forcing them by protesting and by using their words and holding up signs. It's not force them as in like, now let's do physical violence. So of course you should be allowed to do that. I'm sure you could find that sort of language with some right-wing activist movement that says we need to force the government to stop big spending. As long as they're not actually using violence, they're allowed to use that language and they're allowed to use whatever means they want as long as they're not doing violence. It's so weaselly. This is all so weaselly.
And all of the other minority groups that they're discussing. So even the word force would suggest to me that they are attempting to influence the decision and therefore
that's fine.
Are in violation of this law.
Certainly not in violation of the law because the law, if the court was acting objectively, they would overthrow that law based on the precedent set by Madsen versus Planned Parenthood. If you're allowed to protest outside of randos' homes for your political reason, as long as you're following all the other noise ordinances and whatnot, then of course you should be able to do it outside of the Supreme Court justice's home. This isn't controversial. This is like basic, interpret the First Amendment literally type thing. And these guys say they like to interpret the First Amendment literally and the Constitution literally, except when it cuts against their politics, in which case they throw that out the window.
Yeah, I'm not trying to skirt the main point you're trying to make, which I am unsure I can identify, but I haven't seen that specifically said, so it's just hard for me to comment on it.
Yeah, but even if they said it, it's fine. It's fine. We should, force the decision to change. Well, how are they forcing the decision to change? By peacefully protesting. That's fine. So I don't know why he's being evasive here.
Okay.
I think
all right.
I can
You're pleading ignorance on this point.
No, I'm not pleading ignorance. What I can speak to is if any crime has been committed, charge them.
Okay.
I love this. Lib guy, conservative justices lied, and look at the picture they use. This, it's just, he's pretending like I'm an open-minded guy and I'm having this free exchange of ideas, but really the whole thing is like, let me try to own the libs and trigger the libs. That's his whole shtick, man. He's a failed actor, and I remember I debated him in a panel at Politicon, and he very clearly had no interest in, the panel we were on was about finding common ground. He had no interest in it. None. At all. And he would do the whole, what happened? He said he was pro-life, and then I said, oh, it's awesome that you're against the death penalty. And he was like, no, I'm for the death penalty. He literally didn't even realize the massive contradiction. And he went on this long-winded rant about it. And I was like, if you're just going to keep walking into my traps like that, this is going to be an easy panel.
Totally with that. I'm totally with that.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Do you think now, from your perspective as a reasonable Democrat, if you were advising Democrats?
I'm not a Democrat. I've never been associated with the Democratic Party.
Really? What,
Yeah.
Are you in any party, or you're just independent?
No. Yeah, I'm just independent.
You would generally vote for Democrats, I would assume.
I vote for more Democrats than Republicans. I don't care about parties, though. I see parties essentially almost like corporations that justify their own existence to just continue existing in opposition to the other party.
Do you really vote for Republicans?
I voted for there's lots of nonpartisan local elections where I later found out some of the people were not Democrats, but I mean, it's kind of neither here nor there.
Okay, but you're not formally in the Democrat Party. If you were advising a Democratic...
Yeah, David, he's very pro-Democratic, very more than me. I'm actually a registered Democrat because I need to be in New York to vote in Democratic primaries where my vote actually matters, and I could vote for the left candidate. So I'm a registered Democrat, but I'm less of a Democrat than he is. I mean, I voted for... Probably most of the votes I've ever done in my life are for the Green Party. So for him to, I mean, maybe he's technically correct, but it is a little. I'm sure he votes party line Democrat every time.
Candidate, or any candidate for that matter, who is on the left. Would you advise them to continue running on this issue of abortion, on this issue of for instance, the bill that the Democrats last night tried to pass, it failed in the Senate. They said it was to codify Roe versus Wade. It actually went further to create even more abortion protections. Would you advise them to run on this issue in the midterms or to back away from it in the midterms?
So run on it. I think that there's from a political strategy standpoint, there's two options. One would be run on the bill that failed yesterday. That doesn't seem like a good idea to run on that. Yeah. I think where there is, based on public opinion about abortion being as in favor of it as ever before during the Roe v. Wade era, public polling is now in the 60-70% of Americans believe abortion should generally be legal in most cases. That's not in every case, but in most cases. Based on that, it seems to me it would be prudent to run on, we need to get the government out of medical decisions between women and doctors. I mean, and again, you and I are never going to agree on something like when does life begin. That's a different.
We might agree on that. I had a gal who came.
Hold on, but let me at least finish my sentence.
Sure.
You asked me about strategy. It seems to me that since most Americans think abortion should be legal in most cases, the right strategy thing would be, we need to get the federal government out of in the middle of these medical decisions.
But right now, if you let's say that the leaked opinion actually ends up being the final decision. Let's say that Roe v. Wade is overruled instantly, as Elizabeth Warren says, abortion is severely restricted, if not outlawed, in more than half of the states. Instantly, you're in a very different situation. Sure. Knowing that there are all sorts of polls. There's polls that show that 94% of Americans reject the absolutist view of abortion held by some Democrats. There are polls, as you cite, that show that when you ask the question...
He's right that it depends how you word it, the answer that you get, and you can sort of rig the responses or shift the responses based on how you ask the question. But it is undeniable that the most popular position is basically Roe versus Wade, because Roe versus Wade had the trimester standard. First trimester, it's a right to get an abortion. Second trimester, you can do health regulations. The states can do that. Third trimester, if states want, they can ban it. It's a very moderate framework. And when you poll Americans on it, was the Gallup or the Pew? I think it was Gallup. 58% of the country, or maybe Pew, 58% of the country says abortion should be legal with regulations. And then the least popular position was, I forget the exact number, was it 15% or something like that? Say, or 19% say it should be illegal in all circumstances. That's the least popular position. It was 32% that said it should be legal in all circumstances. So when you ask it more directly, the answer is clear. And even overturning Roe versus Wade, I haven't seen a single poll with the majority of Americans supporting overturning Roe versus Wade. So he's being a little weaselly here. He's technically right that you could change the results based on how you word it, but he's wrong that in any framing that Roe versus Wade is unpopular.
And do you support Roe versus Wade broadly? Then there is some majority of Americans that broadly want some abortion liberality.
Michael, that's very mealy-mouthed. I mean, let's just be honest. Asked the same way over the last 50 years, support for Roe v. Wade has continued to go up. Fair?
Well, it depends how you ask the question. If you ask
the same way over the last 50
right.
years.
Knowles is being so weaselly.
If you ask,
it has gone up.
If you ask the question in a way that is, I think, hiding the reality of abortion and is just talking about the decision Roe versus Wade, then sure, there's broad support for it. But if you ask the question and you say, do you support this type of abortion? Do you support this type of abortion? Do you support? Then the support is much smaller.
See,
this is why the bill failed yesterday.
You're creating distinctions only to create doubt when the point I'm making is over the last 50 years, generally overall, should abortion generally be legal in most cases? Support has gone up. You can admit that and still be against it.
No.
Right. Pakman's
But
right.
David, the problem is the devil is in the details, because I mean, I've got a poll right here that goes into depth on different aspects of abortion polling that, depending on how you depending on how you phrase the question, you get very different answers. So I guess
nobody's disagreeing with that, but Pakman's point is that no matter how you slice it or dice it, support for Roe versus Wade is always a majority. Always.
my point is this. According to some of this polling, very few voters and very few independent voters support abortion as a top policy issue.
That's true, but it's also irrelevant. If the Democrats have a prominent issue that just arose where their position is more popular, of course you want to lean into that. Now, would I only run on that? Of course not. But you guys know I'm an economic populist, and I think class is the most important because it cuts across all other differences, and people can sort of unite on that. Independents can unite on that with leftists, and even a lot of moderate conservatives can unite on that with leftists because they don't like their boss either. So, yes, I would... First and foremost, I would eliminate student loan debt and then run on that. I would legalize marijuana. I would do everything I can in my power in order to raise the minimum wage and do the PRO Act. And so, of course, I would do all that stuff for sure, and I would lead with that. But the idea that when you're gifted something by the right where they have a super unpopular position and your position is popular and you want them to not talk about that or not run on that? No, it actually does make a difference. Before, the Democrats were going to lose in a historic bloodbath worse than 2010. Now, they might still lose, but it won't be by nearly as much. Because this is something that is viewed as extreme by the public, and they're correct to view it that way. So Knowles is trying to it's the bad faith advice of like, well, if I was on the left, I wouldn't run on this. But you're not on the left, you're on the right, and so you want the Democrats to make strategic mistakes. So he might even know that the advice he's giving is bad advice. Like, don't touch that issue, you'll end up losing. No, it'll actually help them, and that's almost guaranteed.
It does not seem to motivate a whole lot of people to go to the polls.
Oh, fair. I would agree with that. I agree with that.
So therefore, in that case, if you were advising these...
It depends, though. It could. We just had a situation where this is the first time that Roe versus Wade has been overturned. That's new. That's different. So you can make it a higher priority. There was one poll that showed it was in the top 3 of priorities for Americans now. Why? Because we just got the news it's going to be overturned. So the reality changes. Politics is fluid. It's not stagnant. So again, this is like the bad faith advice. Like, well, I wouldn't run on this if I were you guys because it might hurt you. No, you actually want it to hurt the left, so you're giving them bad advice.
Candidates. You might say, okay, just keep using the same lines that Democrats have used since Roe versus Wade. But if you were talking about focusing a campaign, I think there are a lot of Democrats right now who say, we're going to run on this. This is going to motivate everyone to go to the polls. Make your campaign about abortion. Would you say that's a good strategy, or would you say, hey, maybe back off a little bit and talk about, I don't know, gas prices?
Don't make it just about abortion, but you should talk quite a bit about that as well, given that now the reality on the ground changed, a right's been taken away, and you have the more popular position. This isn't rocket science. Look, I'll end it there. Their back and forth was interesting, but you could also see quite a bit of partisan hackery in this, to say the least. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.